Welcome everybody to FEW's webinar. Today we'll be talking about why some unicorns fail and what we can learn from them. Proudly supported to you by 86 Insider, your digital guide to doing business in China. Before we start, some housekeeping matters. Our session will be 45 minutes long, with the last 10 minutes reserved for Q&A. So be sure to ask many questions. We are very pleased today to have two distinguished guests, Mohan, co-founder of E27, and Caroline, president of China Tech Blog. My name is Megan, and I'm your moderator for today. Now, just one before I pass the stage to both of them, remember to sign up for free FEW membership as part of today's session. Now, I would like to hand it over to Caroline and Mohan to do a quick 1-minute self-introduction. Just to make it a little bit more interesting, can you also talk about your one favorite startup and why is it your favorite? Ladies first, I will hand it over to Caroline.
Thank you, Megan. Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here to share my opinions about startups and unicorns. So I'm the president of China Tech Blog, and then CTB, like we bring the original and insightful piece to West about technology in China from a local perspective. And currently I'm in Schwarzman College in Tsinghua University in Beijing. And then this is a full scholarship program to form the future global leaders. And before this, I've actually worked in AI company, a Chinese AI company, and then in charge of its global expansion in EMEA region. So I have a lot of overseas experiences. And then before that, also working in venture capital for a while. Should I just answer that question and then hand it over to?
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. So my favorite startup is actually a beverage company called Haiti. I'm sure many of you have heard of this company. Yes, very, very popular in Asia, within China. I really like the companies because that they're really using the next generation of, internet mindset, internet features, how to do the co-branding with all the brands to form an ecosystem from a beverage company. Because sometimes we think beverage are very traditional companies, they serve the brand, they put it in the, track in the superstore, but we never thought how can they run their social media, how can they do their branding to really attract that target groups. Like the age from 18 to 27, those are the target group and they really want to serve everything. If you think about Haiti, you first think about a beverage company, but you think deeper and then see all the byproducts, they also do a room perfume. They also do clothes. They also do a lot of IT technologies. They even do some of the food, breads and everything. So I think this is meaning that redefine the beverage industry, and that could be a role model for a lot of companies, around the world, not only in Southeast Asia, to learn from.
Exactly, Caroline, as you were saying about Haiti, I mean, as a bubble tea fan myself, they do have a presence here in Singapore, and it is impossible to queue up and buy their tea because there's just so many people trying to try out the new flavors that Haiti has to offer. Now, Mohan, please.
So thanks, Megan, for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to meet everyone. It's a real honor to be able to share my thoughts alongside Caroline. Haiti is a really good choice, so it's going to be hard to top that one. So my name is Mohan. I run a company called E27. Our mission is to empower entrepreneurs with the tools to build and grow their companies. So we work with a lot of Southeast Asia founders with various activities from fundraising, helping them build thought leadership on the website, and all sorts of activities around the region. My favorite startup would really have to be none other than Grab.
Oh, yes.
It might sound right. Grab has touched the lives of a lot of Southeast Asian people, quite impactfully, right?
Yes.
They started with ride-hailing, but right now they are involved with financial services. They're helping SMEs productize and adopt technology. They've really touched a lot of different facets of people's lives, and I think they are what it truly means to be a Southeast Asian company. So that would be my favorite.
Absolutely. I think as us Singaporeans, we are really proud of Grab, and I really appreciate their services during the circuit breaker. Without them, I would have no place to go for my lunch and dinner options. Now, let's come back to today's topic on unicorns. Just to get the definition right, unicorn is a term to describe any startup company with a valuation of more than $1 billion. And to share some statistics, according to CB Insights, in the year of 2011, there were 3 newly added unicorns. And in 2015, there were 40 newly added unicorns. And as of August, so as of this month, we have a stock take of more than 400 unicorns globally. So we have seen an exponential growth in terms of the number of unicorns in the startup scene. Now, what are some of the reasons, Mohan and Caroline, that you think are driving the success of them in Asia? And how long do you think this will last? Because Caroline went first just now, I'm going to pass this question to Mohan first.
Sure. Okay, thanks for that. I think it's a really good question, right, to understand. And it's quite multifaceted, right, like what has been happening in the last 5 years. I think at the crux of it, right, firstly, the level of technology adoption in the region has been increasing tremendously. You know, people are upgrading from feature phones to smartphones. Broadband quality has been going up. And in a lot of ways, also, this has been pushed by, government efforts to improve productivity as well as the technology standards in their local countries. Access to tech means that, SMEs can do business better, consumers can connect and become more productive. So a lot of it is in the mix of infrastructure, government push, and all that. The other thing is there's been a lot of job opportunities available in the tech sector. So naturally, universities have been, focused on preparing like graduates in the tech sector that then go and end up joining a lot of these companies and help them adopt technology. So I personally feel that it's really a multifaceted group of things that happen. And we're going to see many more unicorns coming out for sure. There was a report that I read that at least by the year, maybe this was pre-COVID, so it might be a bit more challenging now. But by the year 2025, there will be closer to 30 unicorns in Southeast Asia. I personally think that the unicorns will touch on all different factors of our lives, but the approaches might be different. So core banking, healthcare, food, all of this would be sectors that were traditionally dominated by your older school or more traditional companies, and tech will play a very unique role in all of these sectors.
Right. Caroline, do you have any points to add, especially from a perspective from China?
Yeah, definitely. I think Mohan put it really beautifully about like all the things from government, from private sector. I think I want to add one thing is that the venture capital actually play a really important role of hunting those unicorns, right? Because if you look at how many capital actually flow, both like foreign and local capital has been really the force to really redefine the unicorns. And they're really pushing the startups to, grow faster and faster every year. And then we have a lot of issues, right? So like good ones or bad ones, but they are actually really important players. And also they're not only do like a local, venture capital investing. Like if you look at the, 1/3, for example, Sequoia, right? They're actually putting all the resources around like in the world to hunting for those unicorns. So I just want to add that. And also about like second question of how long it will last. I think unicorns will always exist because that's kind of the, the top of a pyramid that the people just like look up to. But I think one thing would change in the future is that the whole kind of gold rush feeling would cool down. Because if you look at the, in 2018, like when, Chinese investors really rushed to India, for example, to do all the, like manufacturing, like Xiaomi brand, right? They really invest a lot in the startup. But then afterwards, they really need to like focus on their own like main business side and really thinking about, how should they maintain a long-term portfolio instead of just like dropping out with some of the startups. So I think that will be the only change to look for in future, and especially after COVID. I think everyone, including the investor, will be rational of, investing in companies, and the standard of being a unicorn will be more restricted in the future.
Absolutely. As we're talking about all these unicorns facing a lot of, as Karen has mentioned, either profitability problem or trying to make themselves sustainable. I think we have to talk about the talk of town right now, right? The first is Lucky Coffee, and at the beginning of this year, and then of course there was WeWork, and I mean, some unicorns are successful, some have failed. When we were to look at the whole spectrum of all these different unicorns out there, and if we were to learn about some key lessons about their downfall, what do you think are the three key lessons we can learn from their downfall? Moha, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I think the caveat here with Luckin, for example, right? I mean, for them it was plain fraud, right? Like CEO
Yes.
was fabricating to like 300 over million in sales. It was a fraudulent activity, less of a company related issue. And to put it bluntly, it was a lot of bullshit economics. It was inflated valuations, and it was just ridiculous overhypeness, right? And I think the final investor saw through that bullshit and decided to not invest, and then that literally forced them to go IPO and collapse. So it was very different scenarios. And right now, especially with COVID, you're seeing different companies struggle in very, very different ways. So Grab, for example, right? Ride-hailing plummeted, but their food business actually went up significantly. So there was some level of balance, but the unit economics for both businesses are not the same. So it didn't mean that overall the example would be Traveloka, right? Another major unicorn where they had a 90% drop in revenue due to COVID, travel company, right? But they were also able to raise like $250 million in cash pretty quickly because investors know that the business is fundamentally strong. The team is fundamentally solid. The brand is great. And if it wasn't for a COVID-related situation, they wouldn't be, in this mess, right? So it really depends on the sectors and the companies that are involved. I think the one thing to bear in mind is this, right? The topic of unit economics is going to be very important at this stage. So companies with poor unit economics are going to have a much harder time fundraising. We've already seen multiple companies in Indonesia, as well as the rest of the region, go through that, right? Sorabel, for example, which is one of the major e-commerce players, they had to shut down within a few months simply because their unit economics were not doing well, and investors realized that it didn't make sense pumping more money into the company. The other thing to take note is also a lot of companies are looking at shifting or investing in other areas that could potentially be more relevant and more helpful during this COVID period. It could be whether is it digitizing of SMEs, whether is it services that are more prevalent and important in this sector. So unicorns are definitely doing the same thing. We've seen Grab do a significant amount of stuff in that space, especially when it comes to SME digitalization. So it's really these two factors, right? I think it's the unit economics part that's going to play a role, and it's also about how well companies can very quickly fundraise during this period.
Right. Absolutely. So we hear from Mohan two key points. First is unit of economics, which means that the company has to, at the end of the day, balance out their term sheets and remain profitable and sustainable. And of course, with a good pool of talent and strong leadership, then the startup will be able to stay agile and have that ability to adapt quickly to the situation. Any thoughts on that, Caroline?
Yeah, I think Mohan really mentioned the fundamental problem is that, like economy is the foundation for either, for big corporates or SMEs to like booming. So I think that's really important. I think I would add on is also about like Luckin Coffee, because like I'm in China, right? So like Luckin Coffee really, like I see it rise and see it fall, like really ironic. So after it's, have the fraudulent actually sit in one of the Luckin Coffee still come, how many people come in and then pick their Luckin Coffee? There are actually a lot. So that's why I agree with Mohan that there is not fundamentally business related problem, but that's more kind of ethical of the leadership. But I think my three takeaways, really similar to Mohan, but probably in a different way. I think my first one takeaway is that IPO is not everything. And then the story shouldn't end, in an IPO, because there is kind of the culture there, right? Like IPO is the final step for every startup. Like once you go to IPO, which means you're successful. That's why there is such an accelerated process for Luckin Coffee from like even 1 year from a no name, like you can say like a coffee shop to a chain coffee shop, and then to this kind of like beautiful like story of internet driven, coffee shops, and then kind of beating like startups. So that should be a little bit ridiculous for a company to think about it in the future, I think. And the second take with that, I think, as I said, venture capital do play a really important role. And they're sometimes really aggressive and also very assertive in some ways. So I think all the venture capital investors should have a farming mindset instead of a hunting mindset, right? When you do bet in one startup, when it's small, right, you should always see, okay, what's the problem they have right now, and how can I use capital or use my experience to help them to grow? So like really farm them to a mature stage, and then harvest them, instead of really kind of putting them a lot of like chemical materials and then put them to grow faster. And sometimes that will actually end up in really, really bad harvest, or after the harvest there's some like backfires. And my third takeaway is that as a company, I think as a startup, you should always looking for some internet features in your company. Yes, you can do something related to traditional industries. That's also fine. But, situation like COVID, or situation like, for example, like foreign intruders, or like a foreign startup company and penetrating in the local market, how can you have the advantage, right? How can you have advantage to like show your competitive thing? Is that you should always think about like online some business. Don't always looking for like offline, because that's a heavy business model. Sometimes it cannot expand very quickly. So I think that's my 3 takeaways, from all the startups I've been, looking or working in China.
Absolutely, Caroline. I love your 3 points, right? First point, IPO is not everything. Second, for VCs, a farming model and not a hunting model. And the third, of course, to always think about online features, even for traditional industries. Now, when we talk about unicorns, I think maybe our impression, I'm not sure about you guys, might not be a very optimistic one, because typically I think people might want to connect unicorns with spending huge sums and not being very thrifty with the spending. I'm not sure whether you guys resonate with that kind of image of unicorns. So if I were to bring up a startup zoo, right? There are new terms in the industry. They are the rhinos, the zebras, the cockroaches, and of course we have the unicorn. In your perspective, what do you think is the best approach to build a company? Maybe Mohan, go first on this one.
Actually, there's really no one size fits all, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've seen such, look at different approaches depending on firstly what their interest is, what's relevant and right for the business at that point in time, and also their personal philosophies, right? So for a simple example, right, like, okay, cockroach companies, like those are the ones that typically will want to be profitable really quickly. They don't want to grow just based on a VC money, but they want to grow through revenue, right? And lately, I've noticed that trend is very prevalent, especially with SaaS companies. It's also very, very prevalent in areas where there might not be easy access to VC capital, right? So in Indonesia, for example, in the early days, that was definitely very prevalent. In Vietnam, in the early days, that was prevalent. In Singapore, where money is fairly easily accessible, founders are now starting to realize that, hey, maybe holding off raising money and going to market faster, building a more loyal user base at the start might be the better approach. So cockroach companies are relevant, I think, more for SaaS type companies. Then you've got the zebra type companies, right, where size matters, profitability matters, but there's also the notion or the idea that they must be doing something valuable to the world, social good and stuff like that. I think this is going to be increasingly important in the next 5 to 10 years. Sustainability is a very big thing. Climate change is definitely a huge issue. And both consumers, in fact, consumers, employees, and I think at some point even shareholders are going to really start caring about this. I was on a call with a very big tech giant this week, and they were sharing with us how in the past their large customers might never ask about how recycling is done for their materials or whether their materials are clean in terms of production. But today that's become a topic of interest because they want to share this information to their publicly listed, their public shareholders, and that actually matters. So I think this is going to be a very, very big thing, right? And lastly, I think is the concept of the rhinos, right? Which is, massively large companies and massively profitable companies. And we just saw, I think this week, right, N Financials,
Yes.
yeah, they just shared, pre-IPO their financials, and you could see how amazingly profitable they are. I think everybody aspires to be that, but it's definitely not an easy thing to be to do, right? We're definitely going to see that really prevalent in certain segments like fintech, maybe like gaming companies. But that's going to be something that I think is going to be quite far away from the reach for most companies in this region specifically.
Caroline, do you share the same view? Is it the same view as what you have seen in China?
Yeah, I would say for now, because after COVID, after kind of the burnout of the P2B, the P2P, and also the OFO, right? Some of you might know, a lot of unicorns has been this imaginary, but now it's kind of a little bit crazy creature from a lot of Chinese venture capital like mindset. So I would say that in China, it really depends on industry, because sometimes that's a kind of a given fortune that you are right now, you're big and profitable, right? Mohan mentioned about Ant Financial, but like they grow from 2003 to nowadays, like 17 years afterwards, right? If you look at it, they also have certain even like government regulation issues along the way, because they don't have the license for issuing the third-party payment like in 2011, and then they actually have to struggling with the kind of the competition with banks, because the banks are allowed to issue those loans, but they are not allowed. So I think it's really a good luck if you are a rhino like by nature. But I think mostly in China, I would separate the company in like B2C, which is all the to customer industries, and then B2B, which is like business to business, right? Like a SaaS, PaaS, or ICE, like all those long-term, slow money, but like big money. I would say for B2C, in the future, it probably investor looking more for cockroach business models, because sometimes you cannot rely on venture capital money to grow. And sometimes if you are to customer, like 2C industry company, the traffic now is really expensive. ByteDance, right? TikTok, Douyin, like all the like Alibaba, like all those platforms are really expensive to buy traffic. So if you are someone, and also like they're managing, or like it's almost like a monopoly right now in China for all the social media traffic to go in with those 3 platforms. So they need to prove to the investor that they can make money, or they should be sustainable from day one. So really cockroach style, right? They wouldn't can look in, okay, I'm giving 2 million, so how can you give me a return? They'll say, okay, if I don't give you the money, how can you survive? So I think that will be kind of a new norm moving forward. But for B2B, I want to say rhino, but I think more practically will be elephant. So big, but not making money from day one. Then they will probably evolve themselves to rhino, because for example, I used to work in an AI B2B company, and then they have to do project, case by case with each client, and each contract should be can be really big, but they probably need even like 1 year to really deliver that project to the banks, for example. And then they have to survive in that 1 year without the kind of the full money, full money being wired in. They have to be sustainable. So they have to prove that they're the elephant, and then prove to everybody, make kind of the key accounts, like workable, then they can make more money. So it's always a choose, right? You can either choose to be profitable from day one, but you have to be really internet customer base, really flexible, starting from small, or you choose the B2B industry, which you have to be big from day one. You have to present yourself that you are able to deliver a complicated project to KA clients. Then you can make that money. So I think it's always a trade-off. And then, within the zoom of, animals, companies are always switching their roles. And sometimes, depends on the economy, right? It depends on the policy, especially in China, right? Policy do matters. Depends on that. You have to be switching your roles around. But unicorn, I would say, is not that fancy anymore. And then sometimes, becomes a joke among startups and among investors. Oh, like, are you a unicorn? And say, oh, don't say that we're a unicorn. We just want to be low key, start up a company and then moving forward.
I guess it's more or less the same view as we observe that Mohan has already shared across Southeast Asia, that we really see the cockroach model for SaaS. So I think interesting, right? That after a few years of hype, unicorns, now people are joking about it and trying not to identify themselves as one of them. Now, I hear both of you talk about this one big topic right now, which is COVID-19. So I really have to ask a question about COVID-19, and that is, we see the impact of it on the global economy. Now, of course, with the exception of China. China was hit first, and it's recovering first. Many businesses, as a result, have closed down, or they have restructured or scaled back from the business. And we see that in startups. And I'm using the term startups now because it's just the general community out there. Now, do you think that there are some, what do you think are some of the obstacles or the limitations that the startup will face amidst this crisis for Southeast Asia and for China? For this one, maybe I get Caroline to go first.
Yeah, thank you. So I think after the COVID, right, this crisis do fundamentally change people's working norm or living norm, right? We probably never know. We can stuck in our own room, probably just very limited, two bedrooms for around 6 months, for example. It's almost fascinating for me to see how I adapt to the working from home module. And I think one trend that I'm seeing, at least in China or in Southeast Asia, is that people are moving or paying attention to the online collaboration industry. The people really think, okay, under this new norm, right? Because we don't know how long this is gonna last. Even though we're saying, oh, during this COVID, right? It's not past time frame. It's still right now we're undergoing this. Right. How can we use more, technology-driven tools to help us to work more efficiently? So that's why if you look at the, startup names or see how CB Insights have been tracking those startups, a lot of online SaaS company has been coming up. For example, SoCoco. I don't know whether you guys know, SoCoco are one of the virtual meeting spaces that allow, schools or companies to virtually meet together. And Zoom, of course, big names, have a lot of news about data leak, retreating a lot of countries, and also a lot more. So I think that will be a big trend for now, either under the venture capital investors focus or startups. That's the first one. And the second one is that people are getting more and more used to online shopping. Everything online behavior should be a fundamental or actually prerequisite for a lot of companies to think about it. And then how to balance that between, for example, a mobile version and desktop version. And that really depends on that local community. When you think about a lot of companies want to penetrate, right, overseas, you have to be localized. So I think that's also one thing. And then I think the third observation that I see is that there'll probably be kind of a cooling period of company expanding overseas. So this is a brilliant opportunity for local company to find chance to really grow up, because you actually you just don't meet competitors from from the superpower country like China and US, right? Because every time one company grow big enough in a local market, they want to expand, they want to go overseas. But under this time, people are really sensitive and really reluctant to expand overseas. So that's why local companies, for example, Singaporean companies, right, the local company can really use this chance to grow fast. And then when they set kind of the market penetration, it's more how they form the ecosystem. I think that will be a really good timing for them.
What about you, Mohan? What are your observations from Southeast Asia?
So I think Caroline has mentioned a lot of very amazing points. Just to add to what she said, right, that I've observed. So I actually think COVID-19 has been really important and useful to companies that want to test a lot of things that they were previously afraid to try or do if it affected their core business. And that was the same even for us, right? We were primarily running events type business. There were a lot of online related memberships and activities that we wanted to do, and due to various reasons, right, be it inertia, be it just pure fear, or be it priorities, right? We never did it. And I think COVID-19 helped to accelerate that. I think Satya Nadella very famously talked about how years of digital transformation happened in a matter of months. And I think that was the positive side effect for COVID-19. Second thing is that I also feel that COVID-19 is a really, really good reason to blame a lot of the failures that a lot of companies have. So if your companies are not doing well, if you're having issues, it's very easy to blame COVID-19, as opposed to feel like, something's wrong with your organization. And then it allows organizations to go back and really reflect and reset. So for organizations that are struggling, it's a really good opportunity to completely pivot or change their direction. In situations where organizations are not growing as well as they did in the past, it's a way to give a bit of a handout or like an opportunity to take back and have a breather, right? So in that sense, I think it's been helpful and positive. The last thing I think is COVID-19 has really allowed organizations, right, to explore the possibility of giving employees a lot more freedom and space, to do things and develop their ideas. Because in the past, in an office environment, you could have been perpetually stuck in meetings or running around, and that face-to-face, that fake work culture could have been there. But with COVID-19, you have to be remote. You have to be mindful of the fact that some employees might have, family obligations at home, kids running around. So you have to, as a leader, right, build that kind of environment that allows some level of freedom and flexibility. And assuming the culture is right and the culture is well, I think most leaders would realize that, letting go of your employees, giving them free space to think and be creative, actually is way better than trying to control everything. So I hope that, will allow some level of, reform or transformation with the way companies are run and organized in this region.
Yeah, with every obstacle, it's also a great opportunity. As I'm sure that's this saying that goes somewhere around. Yeah. Okay. As Caroline was talking about the fact that internationally, because of COVID-19, there might be a slowdown in terms of global expansion, which also means time for the home startups, the local startups, to really ramp up their business. So this is one global wave that we have observed. Now, the other one that we have observed is the increasingly challenging geopolitical tension with the two biggest economic powers, right, United States and China. Now, in light of this, do you see that our large tech giants increasing their footprint in Southeast Asia? And do you think that this is an opportunity for struggling Southeast Asian startups to raise funds or to gain market share because China is facing big headwinds in some of the other countries? Because, okay, this is a question pertaining to Chinese tech companies. So maybe can I get Caroline to answer this question first?
Thank you, Megan. I think, yes, that's what we observe, right? Because a lot of geopolitical attention happens within this year. I would say dramatic changes, right? And then that do affect a lot of technology company, ironically, which also proves that technology now is more and more important. So I think if we're talking about the impact about, US-China tension to Southeast Asia, I would separate that into investor side, which is the capital flow, and also the entrepreneurial side, which is local startup. So I think for investors, right, like the Chinese venture capital flow into Southeast Asia, definitely. I think that's my prediction, because there's still a lot of, venture capitalists are looking for overseas startup. It's also a way they're hedging risk about, domestic risk, right? Because sometimes the local markets are different, and the way that startup company can grow and make profits are also different. So that's why they should hedging. If they're smart, right? They should hedging their risk. So I think if the US has been almost kind of blocked, at least in short term, right, they would definitely find alternatives in Southeast Asia. And also a lot of companies are thinking, Southeast Asia could be the second, wave of China, right? If you look at Vietnam, there are always a lot of, like lower end manufacturing already happening in Vietnam, and then China also moving a lot of that manufacture productivity to Vietnam. And also Singapore, financial hub, the center of a lot of retailing, international retailing brand in Singapore, always change there to grow because they're more developed in a way. So for capital flow for Southeast Asian startup, definitely yes, good news. But for I think Southeast Asian startups, I think they definitely should use the capital to grow. But for Chinese startups to expand it overseas, right? I think they wouldn't do that. Say in a short term, because if say, okay, US shutting down the door, right? India shut on its door, then you just want to try and find new market. I think that would be a lot of like short term focus, because you can never expect the geopolitical trends, like how that'll affect you. So I think for Chinese startups, right, they wouldn't immediately say, okay, we need to find alternatives. So they are now more reluctant to expand it overseas, or they are reluctant to try new markets because they don't know. And then also farming the new market takes time, effort, and capital, so that they wouldn't use, especially this difficult time, right? They have to keep their cash flow going. So that's why Chinese companies, I would say, are more willing to stay in the domestic market. And also this is a big market, right? They can grow up in the domestic market, and that will give a tremendous chance for Southeast Asian local startups to get the money from China, but then grow domestically. And then I think Southeast Asian, shared culture, shared society can actually form this big region, not single market, but kind of regional markets for the startup company to grow up. That's my observation.
Do you resonate with that, Mohan?
Yeah, a lot of it. I mean, very factually correct, spot on, and definitely good points, right? But so here's the thing, right? In the short term, maybe, right, markets like Vietnam and Singapore might, benefit, right, from the issues that are prevalent with this kind of war between China and the US. But in the long term, right, I think the region as a whole will suffer. I think free and open trade, globalization, like global harmony and peace is very, very critical to a thriving global economic landscape, right?
Yes.
We must also recognize that the world is so intertwined that a lot of the companies in Southeast Asia, do trade both with the US and with China, right? And if any of their business activities go down and they stop trading actively with this region, that the region suffers as a whole. Right. So in the short term, Southeast Asia might benefit to a certain extent, but I think in the long term, it will be a negative for the region, right? I think from an investment standpoint, yes, China is definitely going to focus maybe more domestically first. There will be more local efforts that they can build on. I think China might even go into a next wave of R&D where rather than expand through market expansion, they might expand through local innovations, developing new products for their local markets before going out. Now the problem then is that all these amazing new technology ideas doesn't get spread out to the rest of the world to benefit. And I think really this is a missed opportunity for markets like Southeast Asia. On the funding side as well, right? The government could potentially, in fact, the Chinese government could potentially even make it more difficult for foreign investments to happen, for foreign expansions to happen. It doesn't help that with COVID, it's slowing everything down. And maybe for a lot of these Chinese companies, they could figure that, hey, maybe now it's just either too difficult, too painful. Maybe we just want to focus inward. And I think this would be a net loss overall for Southeast Asia. And America, I mean, it all depends on the upcoming election, right? America has not been taking a leadership role in the last few years. So I don't expect that shift to be super sudden because we don't know who's going to win, right? But so Southeast Asia is kind of stuck in between. And I think to a certain extent, there's going to be collateral damage for them.
Exactly. Wow. I have to say, time flies really quickly when we are all having a very nice conversation. Okay, we have time for, it's now Q&A. Sorry guys, I promised 10 minutes, but now it seems that it has to be less than 10 minutes, maybe just one or two questions. First question from the audience, what are some of the telltale signs that a startup is expanding too fast? Would you like to go first?
I think so. It depends on expansion in what standpoint. Is it product related expansion, team, market, and all that, right? And I think we have to always be mindful that the most important thing to look at, especially in current times, is the cash flow or the runway, right? And if the runway is being drastically shortened, especially during this period where it's not so easy to fundraise, and the startup's runway is actually getting cut down despite the fact that the business is growing whatsoever, I think that's a potentially a big issue, right? So I think bearing in mind what the company's runway is, cash in bank, making sure that there's enough financial runway to sustain the growth is one critical thing. And even if making sure that the growth is important, then ensuring that the companies either have credit lines or are actively fundraising or have ways to get access to capital really quickly if needed. If they don't have any of those, then I would say that's also a potentially a big issue, right? And lastly, I think it also depends on the divergence of the product vertical, right? If the company has just achieved product market fit and suddenly they're trying to diverge into potentially new product verticals or segments that are completely new, then that could be a step back. So it really depends on which hat you want to play, but those on a high level, I will look at those three areas.
And for you, Caroline?
Yeah, I think I echo what Mohan said about, like kind of the depends on the market, and also, really depends on your product like development. I think I would add on probably specifically to Chinese market that sometimes it really depends on the stage of your company growth. For example, from 0 to, I would say, 0.5, sometimes you have to be slow to get your, beta test customers, and you have to really find your either product market fit or to find your target customer to really polish the concept. And you should do all that kind of without the highlight on you, right? You shouldn't just really stand on the spotlight and say, hi guys, I'm here, but I'm not ready. Sometimes that will actually crush you, and especially, unfortunately, if you're on some popular tracks, right? You're some popular industries. Investors will hunt you down sometimes, and then sometimes you just feel so passive. You say, oh, I'm not ready, and my team is not ready, right? Then I get so pushed by the venture capitalists, and then I have to do certain things. So I think sometimes you have to hide for a certain time to really polish your product first, because let's go back to the original point that, you should really rely on your product instead of your concept, instead of the industry, right? The industry is fancy, but maybe not your company. Maybe your team is good, but maybe they don't fit that industry specific. So all the things need time to think about. So I would say from 0 to 0.5, you need kind of slow, but sometimes you do need really fast. So for example, when I say a cash flow, right? Maybe at the beginning, you should, especially under this time, you need to have enough cash flow. But when you're really developing your products, for example, making new features, you have to grow very fast to get traffic, to get attention, to get those attention spans from people, because they also have certain, attention spans. So I wouldn't give specific kind of numbers or quantitative, say, oh, how many months you should prepare your cash flow. But I think as a funder, if you're the funder, they usually get a sense of, especially at the early stage, you should be the one judging whether that's too fast or too slow, and then maybe evolve to the later stage, right? When the venture capital coming in, when the even private equity firms come in, and then they will be professionally kind of judge the process, and then they will also hire professional managers for you in the company.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Mohan. Okay, we have time for one last question. Okay, if you have to place a bet, okay, you have to place a bet, okay? You cannot not answer this question. And pick a city that you think, in Southeast Asia, that you think will be the next Silicon Valley. So in Southeast Asia, which city will it be? 5 seconds.
I think Caroline should go first. I would love to hear her thoughts.
Do you want me to exclude China or actually include China?
Well, the question from the audience is actually in Southeast Asia. So
Southeast Asia,
unfortunately have to exclude China for this one.
Yeah. I want, if I'm the one, like personal opinions, I I think Singapore is the one I think can grow, because when I did the kind of Europe like EMEA kind of expansion, and also I touched upon Southeast Asian market a bit, and I've been working with Singapore universities, because I think one feature that I really admire Silicon Valley is that it's really technology driven or research driven, right? They have all the university there, and then talents from there can really spin off their research project or research product from the lab to the market. So it's almost kind of really mature supply chain from the lab to the market. So I think I always looking for high quality educational, education entities or high level education schools. I think Singapore is the place that has a lot of concentrated education resources there. And then that will require, and also they have a lot of like a hardcore science technology, because I think those things are fundamentally changing our lives, changing our, industries. So I think that will be a really important feature to really form a Silicon Valley. Also, like sometimes you don't have to be the next Silicon Valley, right? You should have your own format of things with your local community. But I think if you're just talking about Silicon Valley, educational resources is really important, and also the market. Why I choose Singapore? Definitely Singapore, the single market probably doesn't big enough. Sometimes it's also too concentrated for startups to grow. But I think it has a side impact on a lot of, neighbors or neighbor countries, and then also have the kind of stand up role model effect on those things. So that's why I choose Singapore. But my second choice actually a little bit related to Ho Chi Minh, but I think Singapore is definitely my priority there.
What about you, Mohan?
Yeah, so my honest answer is I don't think any of the cities in Southeast Asia could be like Silicon Valley. It's a completely different style, vibe, and model. And I think they shouldn't be, right? I think every one of them should create their own culture and style. I think in the past, replicating Silicon Valley was the number one thing everyone wanted to do. But over the years, they've realized that actually they should be building a model that makes the best sense for them. I completely agree with Caroline. I mean, I'm a Singaporean homeboy, so definitely I'll support like Singapore, right, in that sense. But if I really had to pick an emerging city, right, I would definitely say Vietnam, right, as a whole, right. The tremendous amount of tech talent that they have, the tremendous focus on education that they have, and the very fact that a large percentage of the population is very young and really wants to focus on tech is something that's very, very promising. And I think there's a certain, like, sometimes you have to be there to know this, right? But there's a certain hunger in the Vietnamese people, right, that is very, very hard to see elsewhere. And I think maybe in 10, 20 years from now, the question would be like how to be a lot more like Vietnam or Ho Chi Minh, right, in that sense. Because the way they do things, the hunger they have for achieving something, and the way they strive for getting what they want is quite phenomenal, right? So if I had to pick, I would definitely pick Vietnam.
Great. It's now 6:17. We are 2 minutes overrun. I'm sorry, guys, we cannot answer all the questions. We have a few other questions streaming in. What we will do is we'll forward the questions to Mohan and Caroline, and when they have replied, we will maybe post that on our social media. Once again, so thank you guys for joining us, and a big thank you for Caroline and Mohan with us here today. Remember to sign up for our free FEW membership during this session, and take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Mohan.
All right. Bye.